I am a holistic veterinarian over in Virginia and have had my practice since 1990 and have been looking at natural ways of feeding horses as one of my kind of passions. And the more we learn about natural feeding, the more we really go back to nature. And the more we end up feeding horses real food. And real food for a horse is not just grass, it's plants and herbs. The goals of feeding holistically or feeding a natural feeding program are to diversify what you eat. So we don't need to eat the same thing every day, even though we have a tendency to feed our horses the same food every day. And then we have grass that's very often a monoculture, meaning one type of species of grass. And that's like eating Hostess Twinkies every day. Maybe not quite that bad, but the idea is that you're eating the same food on a day in and day out basis. But in nature, horses actually eat a lot of different plants, and grass is just one of many. So the general diversity of what they eat is important. The diversity in everything is actually important. So if we have a diverse pasture, we have actually healthier soil. And the term that is being used these days to talk about the microbes in the soil, in the animals, in the plants, everywhere, is the microbiome. And there's a tremendous amount of research now being done on the microbiome. And they realize that we have good bacteria that live in our eyeballs, in our nose, not just in the gut. And there are microbes in the soil that are extremely important as well. The microbes in the soil help the plants absorb nutrients so that they can grow better. Most of the microbes that actually live in the horse's gut, and truthfully even in the human's gut, are actually based in soil microbes, not the kind we eat in yogurt. We come down to the fact that microbes are the source of health for everything. And we have this circle of life, starting with the microbes in the soil, through the plants, into the animal, and the healthier the animal, the more diverse their food is and their microbial population. So this little chart that you see, don't even attempt to read it, is an example of what we know at the stage that this paper was published about the microbial diversity of the horse's gut. So there's a lot of bugs in there, and we probably have not even begun to understand the thousands and thousands of different types of bugs that are present. Some of the really interesting research is that there are very clear differences in the microbial population between horses fed grain and horses fed grass. The horses that are fed grass have much higher levels of our fiber-digesting bacteria, but more importantly, they have more diversity overall in their microbial population. So that goes back to diversity of that I was talking about with diverse microbes in the soil. We can see very clearly with the research that we have diverse microbes in their bacteria. Our grain-fed horses, we have a higher proportion of our carbohydrate digesting bacteria, but we have a decrease in our fiber digesting bacteria. And interestingly enough, we have 10 times higher level of lactobacillus species. Those are the ones that are very familiar to us, and they are actually acid-loving species of bacteria. And those are the ones that you commonly have in things like your yogurt and in your supplements that you feed the horses. But our grain-fed horses have a lot of the lactobacillus. Our grass-fed horses do not. So how are we going to improve our horses' health? Through the diversity of what they take in. So a really healthy pasture is not that beautiful green, perfectly mowed thing that we sort of dream of when we think about horses. And we move to the country and we get our own piece of property and we want this perfectly green pasture. It's not actually really what we need. We really need something that looks more like the picture here, where there's all kinds of what we would call weeds. But, as we're going to learn, most of those weeds are actually very beneficial plants. So the horses, if you actually put a horse into a diverse area or a pasture, or just watch what they're grazing if you have a kind of weedy area, yes, they will eat some of the grass, but they will also pick other plants. And if you watch their mouths very carefully, you'll see all different kinds of things go into their mouth. And they will pick around the plants they don't want, and they will eat the plants they do want. And that's how we can turn a horse out into, say, a field full of buttercups. Buttercups are actually toxic, but they have no interest in eating them. They're bitter, they don't taste good, and they're going to eat everything else around them. They will also tend to eat these plants when the plants are ready to be eaten. And that is when they taste the best, and that's when the horses will eat them. And the rest of the time, they will grow and they will get big, they'll get fibrous, they'll make their seeds, and then they will die back. So some plants we actually need to eat the roots from. Some plants they want the seeds, some plants they want the leaves when they're young and tender. Most horses will not eat the stuff that's toxic unless they are starving, or sometimes when we put horses who are obese into pastures that basically into dry lots, they don't have anything else green to eat, and they may chew on something that's toxic just because there's nothing else, and we're trying to cut back on what they take in. So that's just one thing to keep in the back of your mind if you're having to dry lot your horse. So our horses are naturally herbivores. They are adapted to digest the plant, the fibrous part of the plant material, and extract the healthy part. They have a cecum, we do not. So the cecum is what can digest that cellulose and get the actual beneficial compounds out of an herb or a weed. And they get most of their food from forage, most of their caloric intake from forage, because they are able to digest that fiber, whereas if we ate that, it would not go over quite so well. So weeds are generally herbs, not 100% of the time, but most of the time. If you look in your barnyard or you invite an herbalist out to your barnyard, you can spend an hour and not really leave your barnyard. You'd be amazed at how many plants are out there that are beneficial. And we're going to go through some of those plants, and you'll see how many of them are growing in your backyard, and you may not have even realized it. These herbs have direct healing properties. They are medicinal. And the horses know that. And there are times that if they have an illness themselves, they will go and eat certain plants. And the rest of the year, they may not touch those plants. And that is true across the animal kingdom. There's a branch of research called zoopharmacognosy. Big, huge word. But what that means is the study of animals self-selecting plants for different reasons. And they've documented this in all different kinds of species, from elephants to primates to you name it. Some plants that are out there are just plain very nutritious. They contain protein, they contain fats, they contain essential oils, they contain minerals, they contain the medicinal or herbal components. The interesting thing is that some of these minerals, or some of these plants, actually grow in certain soils, and they either bring in certain minerals or they help extract certain minerals out of the soil and make them more available for other plants. So if you look at dirt that's been disturbed for whatever reason, somebody comes in and does some construction, there is a sequence of plants that will colonate that area. And that is a very logical sequence when you understand what the plants are actually doing. And these plants they're probably enhancing the soil microbes, and that research is getting underway in a huge way. And we're understanding more and more about how the plants directly affect the soil microbes. So don't try to digest this whole slide. What we're really looking at here is comparing the nutritional value of alfalfa, which is the top left-hand corner plant, with dandelion, lamb's quarter, chicory, comfrey, plantain, nettles, burdock, cleavers, and curly dock. All of these are common plants and common herbs. So we're not going to go through the whole chart, but if you just look across the top is protein. So the amount of protein in alfalfa is say, in this example, is around 20%, 21%. In dandelion, you have 25% protein. Lamb's quarter, which is not as palatable to horses, is 31% protein. Chicory, which is those pretty purple flowers, is almost 20% protein. Comfrey is 23% protein. Plantain, 19%. Nettle, 25%. So you get my point. There is a tremendous amount of nutritional value in these plants. You can go down this and you can look at the calcium and the phosphorus, you can look at the minerals, and what you're going to see is that all of these plants are equally or even better than alfalfa as food material. The other side of this coin is that if you have a insulin-resistant or fat horse that can't have a lot of nutrition, and you really want to be feeding them hay that's more like straw that doesn't have a lot of nutritional value, you have to realize that some of these herbs do have excellent nutritional value. There's a few ways that we can go about creating this healthy microbiome, creating health in your horse. So I came up with this idea as I was kind of studying the microbiome and realizing that we're really dealing with soil-based microbes. So how are we best going to get soil-based microbes into our horses? We don't have very many soil-based supplements at this point. So if we take and create a corner of our garden, our paddock, our yard, wherever, just like you would a great organic garden. So you're going to make your soil really healthy. You're going to add lots of organic matter to it. You're going to do everything that you can to grow as if you were going to grow good organic vegetables. But instead of planting vegetables for your house, plant a variety of plants, like we're going to talk about, that your horse might want to eat. And then have them graze for 10 minutes a day. And with the soil being nice and loose, they're probably going to be pulling up some roots of these plants, and that's okay. And they're going to be getting some of these soil microbes. And if you have a garden, you should be eating your vegetables probably unwashed if you're growing organically. And then you'll get some soil microbes. And you can feed your horses pieces out of your garden. Horses can eat all kinds of vegetables. They don't just have to eat apples and carrots. If you're boarding your horse and you don't have the ability to create this little garden at your boarding facility, create it at home and then pick it before you go to the barn. And take your microbes with you. They'll survive the trip in your car. Or we can go ahead and create healthy pastures that are very diverse. And this can be a little bit more of a challenge because in many pastures we have a lot of traffic, we have a lot of horses, and if the pastures are heavily overgrazed, only the very toughest of our weeds will survive. But some of those weeds are still good and nutritious. Several ways you can go about trying to create this healthy pasture is to rotate your pastures and keep one area that's a sacrifice area for your really fat guys and your bad weather use, like we're having now with a lot of rain, and we're finally getting some moisture in the ground, and everything's turning to mud. So instead of tearing up your good pastures, you can have a sacrifice area. And you can do this with a piece of electric fence. You don't have to put up a fancy board fence to do it. You can add diversity then to your overall pasture areas, or maybe to one pasture area and have that be the more specialized grazing time. And then you can also just plant these plants along, essentially as a hedgerow, which would be along the edges of the field, along your fence lines, and just not mow down your fence lines on a regular basis. And that can often be one of the better ways of creating healthy grazing, because you can mow your main field and keep some stand of grass going, and then you can let your hedgerows or borders grow up. Part of the problem with adding herbs to your main pasture, if you're going to mow, and in order to have a good stand of grass, we do need to mow. But we are mowing down some of these plants, and they don't get to flower, and they don't get to necessarily go to seed. You may still have the fresh growing green plant, but you won't actually have the part that the horse might want, which could be a flower or could be a seed. So that's one of the issues that you have to look at. The plants that you're going to use, each plant has different seasons in which it's edible, different seasons in which they prefer it, and different seasons in which it's actually going to grow well. So when you put together a sort of a seed mix, then you can think about the early, mid-season, and late-season crops. In the hedgerows, or right around the edges of the fields, or the edges of the woods, if you have woods as part of your pasture, you can let the edges of the woods become part of your hedgerow. Some of your woody plants actually can be nibbled on in the winter, and they have really good nutrition in the terminal buds, in the little buds that you will see on the stems. The problem sometimes is that the horses will actually chew them down quite a bit during the winter, and they certainly can damage them or kill them off, especially when the plants are young. So you may have to fence them out of your area that you're trying to make into a healthy, diverse plant area until these plants get established. Some plants will like where you are, some plants will not. I am personally not a great gardener. I figure if they survive me, they can stay. And if they die, I probably won't get that plant again. And I think that's important to realize, that just because somebody down the road can grow a certain plant really well in their pastures, there are microclimates even within one field of what plants are going to grow in different areas. So an area that has a little more moisture is going to grow certain plants. An area that's very hot and dry is going to grow other plants, and the plants that like moist are not going to grow there, and vice versa. So you start out with a mix of plants, and some are going to establish themselves well, and some of them are not. If you have the opportunity and you're out doing some trail riding, you can observe what your horses are eating. Some of them are grabbing any leaf along the way, but some of them are definitely selecting what they want to eat as they go down the trail. So we're going to look at a couple, or at quite a few of these plants that you can incorporate. And as you think about it, and as you start to walk around your own pastures, or just look at the pictures, you'll realize that you already have an awful lot of these. And you may just need to allow them to be there instead of constantly trying to get rid of them. Dandelion is a fabulous herb. How many people have dandelion? Probably everybody. And how many people try to get rid of dandelions? Probably quite a few. So don't get rid of them. And if your neighbors have them and they don't want them, offer to graze your horses on their lawns or their pastures in the springtime. Both the roots and the leaves are one of our best herbs. And if you take a horse near a dandelion in the springtime, they will pull your arms out, usually trying to get at it. They will eat the leaves. You will see them dig into the dirt to get the root. So after a long winter of nothing much fresh, nothing much that's green going into them, this is a tonic, a spring tonic, that really, in herbal medicine, we talk about being a blood cleanser. It is a little bit of a diuretic. It helps flush the system out. It has a tremendous amount of minerals in it. So if you're using it as an herb, you may actually use it as a diuretic. That is a safer diuretic than something like Lasix, because this has the minerals that get peed out when you use a diuretic. It's an excellent liver tonic. It's an excellent kidney tonic. So cultivate it. And it's also actually a beautiful plant. Mullein is that kind of weird-looking plant that grows in certain areas. There's an area in West Virginia in which it just about takes over the field. It is, when it's small, the horses like to eat it. They don't eat it quite so much when it's large and tall. But it's a plant that tends to appear when soil has been damaged. And it's it's mucilaginous. So if you break off a piece of the leaf and chew it, it will get slimy. And that's its benefit. It is slightly diuretic. It's a really good tonic for the respiratory tract and the digestive tract. So if horses have any digestive upsets, mullein is very soothing and healing. Great for coughs and colds. So ulcers, irritation, anything that's inflamed. So it's a good plant to have. It's rather a large plant, so it's not as useful, or you don't always like to have it in the middle of your field, but it works great along the borders. And it lasts for a couple of years. The first year, it's just flat near the ground. And the second year, it forms great, huge stalk that can be 3 or 4 feet tall with these yellow flowers on it. Echinacea is a plant that many people are familiar with, and it's a great garden plant. The roots or the flowers are used, and the animals will eat them. Echinacea is well known as an antiviral, antibacterial, immune stimulant type of a plant. You can use it in chronic infections. Horses will seek it out if they're not well. They may or may not seek it out if their immune system is just fine. There are several different varieties of echinacea. The purple one in the picture is the most common, and they all have medicinal qualities. So some of the herbalists prefer one species over the other, but you really need to grow the species that's going to grow best in your soil. And it's also a really easy thing to grow. And it's pretty, and it's good for the pollinators as well as for the animals. This is yarrow, and there's three plants that look fairly similar. There's yarrow, there's Queen Anne's lace, and there's hemlock. And the hemlock is toxic, quite toxic. Grows in really wet places. It's not such a common thing to see in the field. It's usually going to be in your swampy, moist areas. But if you're not sure, get somebody to help you identify what you have. Yarrow is a very useful plant. The Queen Anne's lace is not as much a useful plant, and it will kind of take over in a field, especially a field that doesn't have the best quality soil. So you don't really want to encourage the Queen Anne's lace. It's perfectly okay, but the horses really don't want to eat it. It's not toxic, but it's not a desirable plant, where yarrow is a desirable plant. And at certain times of the year, you'll go out and you'll realize that half the flowers of the yarrow plant have been eaten because they were at an appropriate stage for harvest. And the wild animals, the horses, whoever's out in that field, have eaten some of the yarrow flowers off. It's also, if you go and harvest it yourself, you can, if you're ever stuck in the field and you have a horse that's bleeding, just pick some yarrow and crush it up and put it right on the wound, because it's effective for hemorrhaging and bleeding. It's a tonifying herb, and it's a bitter herb. If you taste it, it's not the pleasantest thing to eat, but bitters are extremely good for the digestive tract. They're very tonifying, and that's one of the reasons that the horses like to eat them. Stinging nettle. Nobody likes stinging nettles, right? Wrong. They are a fabulous plant. The horses are not going to want to eat stinging nettles when they're really mature, because they've got the hairs on them and they're uncomfortable to eat. But early in the year, they're great. You can put them in your salad. And they're extremely nutritious. They're very high in mineral content. And they are liver, gallbladder, kidney tonic. They're extremely good for kidney, if you ever have kidney disease, which is not super common in horses. But it's an excellent, excellent tonic herb with its high mineral content. It's good for their feet. So if you have a bunch of this growing, leave it. And just don't expect the horses to eat it in the middle of the season. They may pick off some of the flowers, but they're not going to eat the leaves themselves. Plantain. This thing grows everywhere. There's all sorts of plantain, and it's another one of these wonderful herbs. You'll see it all over the barnyards in this area. And the horses will tend to eat it at different times, different stages of its growth. They don't necessarily like it when it's really tough in the later stages, but if they really need it, they will go ahead and eat it at almost any stage. It's excellent for inflammation, any irritated surfaces. It's got a little bit of that mucilaginous quality. If you break the leaf apart and feel it, you'll feel a little bit of sliminess to it. The seeds of it are a little bit naturally laxative, so the horses may use it if they feel that they are a little dry inside. There's some evidence that it's used certainly in some of the parasite formulas. I'm not going to say that this is going to deworm your horses, but it certainly is going to help keep their digestive tract healthier and potentially at least help prevent some of the parasite infestation. And I'm sure if you think about it, everybody's got some of this growing around is burdock. Now, burdock is kind of a double-edged sword. It's one of our best herbs for the liver. It's a fabulous herb for cancers, tumors. It's a diuretic, but it has these burrs. And so we have a little bit of a tougher relationship with this plant than we might like. And if we have it, we might want to keep it just off in one corner and let the horses have access to it very carefully. But the burdock part of it is the burr, the seed, is not the desirable part. It's going to be the leaf and actually the root itself. And the roots are usually at their best medicinally in the fall. And you may actually find horses will pick at roots when they need them. So this one you have to decide where you want it and how much of it you want, because you really don't want it growing through your whole pasture, or you're going to be grooming burrs out of your horse's manes and tails all day long. But you may have a lot of it, and if it's not a problem, then it's a very beneficial plant. Next we have chicory. This is one of those highly nutritious plants that grows, it flowers in the morning, and then you don't really notice it in the afternoons or the evenings because the flower dies back. It's another one of these bitter plants that are good for digestion, very high in mineral content, very high in vitamins. It's a super plant. And it generally behaves itself fairly well if you have some on the edges of your area. If you mow it too much, it will eventually go away. It's not super durable that way. But again, a very desirable plant. In early spring, we have cleavers. And cleavers are a plant you may or may not pay much attention to. But it's one of those very early spring, and consequently often very desirable because the horses haven't had anything green. It's another one of these blood purifier types. It cleans the system. It gets the liver going, it gets the kidney going, and we basically detoxify our system through the liver or through the kidney. So elimination of toxins. The liver breaks things down and then sends it out into the blood. The kidney excretes things through the urine. The digestive tract can excrete things through the manure, and then we can also lose some toxins or some undesirable metabolites through the skin and the sweat. But cleavers is that early spring greenery. It's a funny little plant. It's kind of sticky when you feel it. You probably, if you're a gardener like I am, you probably have it all over your garden in the spring. It will die back very quickly, so it actually is not detrimental, even though it might cover a fairly large area. It's not detrimental to other plants that will come along in the future. So if you have it in your home garden, you can pick it and take it to your horses if you don't have it at the barn. It's not going to be a durable plant to be out in the field. Most of the time you're not going to see it there. You're going to see it on the edges, and that's where it's going to live the best, or in your little organic garden. Next is chickweed, and this is another one of those. It's usually a spring thing. It grows everywhere. It's the other thing that takes over my entire garden in the spring. So between the cleavers and the chickweed, I have really nice ground cover, and it's medicinal. The horses will eat it, and it's an antihistamine, it's diuretic, and these are not strong diuretics. The horses are not going to be peeing everywhere, but it's going to clean through the kidneys, It's an expectorant, so it's going to have some effects on the respiratory tract. You have a little bit of a spring cough. And it is an excellent source of vitamin C. So it's a way of stimulating the immune system through your vitamin C. Nice little plant. Not going to be in the main part of your pasture, but on your edges and in your garden. So there are tons of plants that you conceivably can plant in your pastures. And we could go on for another 20 slides of different things you could put in. But these are the ones that we've kind of gone over. Some of the common ones, many that you already have. Dock leaves is another plant. They don't get very palatable when they're large, but they are very nutritious, a very nutritious plant. So when they're small, the horses will eat at them. When they're big, you just mow them, and you'll find you usually have some dock in many fields. German chamomile has its kind of relaxing sedative properties. German chamomile is a good plant if you want to plant something out in the fields. It's a little hard to get started, so if you have a lot of traffic in your fields, it may not start very well. But once it is well established, it is pretty durable, and it works well in a hedgerow type of situation. The goldenrods most people have them. You don't have to go out and buy any goldenrod seeds usually. Goldenrods are good digestive aids. They're the beautiful yellow, later blooming, August, September flowers. They can take over a pasture, and the horses are not going to eat them when they're big. They're going to eat the small, fresh growing plant. So they certainly can be mowed away. And if you learn to identify the goldenrod in its sort of small mowed-looking shape, you'll realize that the horses actually are eating it. But you don't have to have a lot of it in going to flower and seed because it will take over. The mints, peppermint, spearmint, mountain mint, there's many different mints. Those are really flavorful. They smell great when you drive over them and mow them. If you mow them too much, you can kill them off. So you might want to keep them a little bit on your edges. They're an excellent digestive tonic. And you may want to keep some mint around anytime you feel like your horses' digestion needs a little tune-up. It's also very easy to grow at home and in the garden kind of situation along the fence lines. And mint is very, very prolific. So if you don't have a very green thumb, mints are great. Then we can look at a few plants that we can put truly in the hedgerow, on the edges of the fence, on the edges of our wooded areas. These are more woody plants. And these may or may not be suitable for your location, but these are just some options that you have. White willow bark, or willow, if you have a moist place and you have a willow tree, and the horses are eating the willow and making you crazy, or they're picking at the bark, that's medicinal. They can pick at the bark enough to kill the tree, so you do have to watch that. And you may have to wrap some chicken wire or something like that around in order to protect the tree and just let them have a little bit of the bark or the branches. The witch hazel grows in our woods. It's one of our early flowering plant, small trees. It's a lovely spring tonic. The horses definitely can overgraze it and kill it, but if you have it in your woods, and you may very well, then you can you can sort of cultivate it or protect it. Our wild raspberry bushes are great. They can take over in a field. They're a great tonic for our female reproductive system. And these are the raspberry leaves. The horses don't eat the stems. They would be happy probably to eat the raspberries themselves, but they're mostly going to browse on the leaves in the early stages of growth because of the prickers. But this can make a nice edge to your field, especially if you're doing a lot of breeding. It balances your hormones. It's excellent post-birthing to let your horses have access to if they've had a foal. It's got some astringent properties, and you can pick the berries, so it's a good plant. I'm not sure whether you have the last slide. I think I added that later. The idea behind this is to have some fun, grow some health, and take this sort of idea as a project to add some diversity to your horse's diet. But in the process, you're actually going to expose yourself and your dogs and probably even your cats to a healthier microbial population, because you're going to be handling some of these plants, touching the soil, and you don't have to wash your hands after you've been digging in the garden. You can eat your lunch with dirty fingers because it's all good dirt. So you also get to know the plants around your own property. And it's amazing how many good plants you have, even though there are some of them you've been fighting and trying to get rid of. You get yourself more connected to nature and your horse more connected to nature. You end up with good health for everybody. So in my practice, I do acupuncture, chiropractic, homeopathic medicine, herbal medicine, Chinese medicine, do all kinds of eclectic things, a lot of nutrition. And I put together a little homeopathic booklet that it's a great first aid guide if you're just wanting to learn about homeopathy. And it's just another branch of natural healing. It's actually very powerful, it's very simple, and even better, it's cheap and it tastes good. So you can buy the homeopathic remedies at the store. The book is a nice little cookbook, so you don't have to know anything. And it's $12. And it'll get you started with most of the things that horses do to themselves.
Okay, well, thanks, Dr. Harmon. I think we're going to move along. We really appreciate it, and we'll hopefully talk to you soon.
Great, thanks for having me and sharing the information.